I remember this moment in my life where we had kids, and it had been this like nonstop trying to figure out how to take care of kids and fall into a new routine of children. And we'd gotten that down. We could feed them and clothe them and make sure that they had their schedule. And then there's this moment where you're like, but now I have to teach them to be good people. Right? And that is terrifying. Like, it's this terrifying moment where you're like, I have to teach them all these things about what it means to be like an upstanding person of integrity and honor, and that seems like a lot. And so you're trying to find these ways to teach your kids what it means to be a good person or to be a kind person in all these areas. And one of those areas that we're trying to teach our kids recently is how to think about that when it comes to money. So they get an allowance. I got an allowance when I was a kid. I got $1.25 a week, so I was a high roller. Of that $1.25, I had to give a quarter, though, in the offering plate. That was a mandatory quarter right off the top. So I put the quarter on the plate, and that left me $1 for whatever my heart desired. Normally, that was penny candy. I bought a lot of penny candy, and that has led to years of dental bills. It still comes back to haunt me. So we give our kids an allowance, and we say, listen, here's some money that you can put in a savings envelope. Here's money you can put in an envelope to spend, and here's money that you're going to put in an envelope to give away. And the only thing I require is that you put money in the envelope to give away. Now, one of my children loves to put money in the envelope to give away. I mean, just would give away all of the money if they could. Said to me recently, I hope when I grow up I have a lot of money so I can give it all away to people who need it. Like, that's real sweet, Warms my dad's heart. One of my children, though, is less enthused with the idea of giving their money away. So when we give them the money, and I said, you have to put money in the giveaway envelope, and they say, why? Why? And I said, well, because we're generous, and we take care of other people, and we give, but why? Because I said so. Like, that's what we do here, We probably all fall somewhere in that spectrum. Between being generous, radically generous, and between holding on to the things we've got. We're all in there somewhere. In the scripture we read this morning, Paul is writing to Timothy. And Paul is laying out for Timothy kind of what it looks like to live as a follower of Jesus. Paul says to Timothy, fight the good fight of faith. Fight the good fight. Make the confession. Remember the promise you made before the other people. And what Paul's saying to Timothy is, you were baptized. You made a confession and a commitment before others. And so here's how you need to live in light of that. And throughout the book of 1 Timothy, Paul lays out for Timothy what it looks like for him to live as a follower of Jesus. And he talks about some of these different areas. And at the very end of the book, here in chapter 6, Paul starts to write about Timothy as he thinks about the ways that you live with and deal with money. About what it looks like to live as a person who follows Jesus when it comes to our money. Money is a core discipleship issue. The way we think about money, the way we handle money, the way we give money, that is the heartbeat of discipleship. It is a core discipleship issue. Now, I want to remind you, before I get too far into the sermon, that this is what we call a lectionary passage, right? A lectionary passage is just a passage that has been chosen for the church of all places, and we preach it. I didn't pick this. Okay? I didn't pick this because I wouldn't pick this. I would pick a passage about justice and resisting evil and justice and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves, and I would preach that and feel really good about it, and you would feel good about it. But today I'm going to preach on money, and that is more nerve-wracking than I would care to tell you. Because nobody wants you to meddle with their money. Our pocketbooks, our checkbooks, our wallets, they're pretty close to our heart. And nobody wants you to meddle with their money. I remember a couple years ago, I was at General Conference, and the church, the United Methodist Church, was facing some financial hardship. And Bishop Bruce Blake was preaching the sermon, and over again, Bishop Blake kept saying, the church doesn't have a financial problem, we have a faith problem. The church doesn't have a financial problem, we have a faith problem. And sitting next to me was a clergyman named John. And we're sitting in the very front row, like in this big convention center. John's sitting next to me, and as the bishop starts preaching, John just starts saying, oh, you're meddling now, Bishop. You're meddling now, right? Just yelling out at him, I wasn't sure if it was heckling or encouraging. I didn't know what to make of it. As I preach today, there are some of you that are going to feel like I'm meddling. I hope, it has been my prayer today and all week, that the meddling I do is the Spirit's work and not mine. So maybe we'll be open to that together. As Paul lays out for Timothy what it looks like to live with money and to understand and handle money, Paul says to Timothy right off the bat, you get two choices, right? You can either choose a life that leads to destruction, or you can choose the life that is real life. And as you look at the text, this is the choice that Paul lays out for Timothy. You can choose a life that leads to destruction, or you can choose a life that leads to real life. And in verse 9 of this passage, Paul lays out for Timothy what a life of destruction looks like. He says, but those who want to be rich, who are unwilling to be content with what they have, but those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Right off the bat, Paul says this pursuit of wealth, a pursuit of being rich, a pursuit of money above all else, an allegiance to money above all else, will take you on a road to destruction. You read that passage, and I read it several times this week, where Paul says these words. Listen again. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So if I was going to like sketch out that sentence and diagram it for you, right? I would diagram it and think about the rich, and they are the people that are being plunged into destruction, right? Because Paul talks about the people who are being plunged into destruction. But I looked at the Greek, and here's what surprised me. When Paul is talking about the people who are plunged into destruction by the pursuit of riches, he's not talking about the people who are trying to get rich. He's talking about the people who are being trampled in the process. Do you hear that? Paul says your desire to be rich will lead you to destruction and will also destroy those around you. There are those who are being walked on and trampled on and forgotten because the rich try to get richer. The destruction that Paul warns us about in the pursuit of riches is a destruction that breaks relationship between us and other people. It is a destruction that breaks relationship between us and God's creation. It is a destruction that breaks relationship between us and God and God's very self. Paul says, you choose a life of destruction. Let me just pause for a moment, because there are a bunch of y'all here who are like 18 to 20-something years old, and you're making choices about the life that you're going to have. You're making choices about the major that you're going to pick, and you've probably looked at those sheets that talk about the amount of money that somebody makes in your job, and the amount of jobs available. And you might have picked the major that you've chosen, not based on the deep calling of your heart, but on this desire to be rich. Hear me. That way, as Paul says, is a way that leads to pain. Do the thing that makes you come alive. Do the thing that sparks joy for you. Do the thing that allows you to meet the great need of the world. That might be something that we all need to hear, even if you're not 18 to 20-something. So those with ears, let them hear. There is an option for life that leads to destruction, Paul says, but there is also an option for life that is really life. I love the passage, how this passage ends, as Paul talks about people who are generous. He says, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so they may take hold of the life that really is life. Paul invites us to this new kind of life, to a life that is full and abundant, to a life that isn't marked by striving and stress. Paul invites us to a deep kind of life where we know contentment and peace, to a kind of life that is marked by joy, to this life that really is life. That's what I want. That's what I long for. And I'm sure deep down inside, that's what you want too. Paul says the life that really is life is marked by generosity and giving. It's marked by those who share, who do good, who are rich in good works, who are generous. It's marked by this radically countercultural way of being that realizes that the fullness of life is found not in our pursuit of things, but in our deep ability to be generous and to share with others. That the fullness of life is found in our deep ability to see the pain and hurt of the other around us and to do all we can to step in to meet that need. When we live that kind of life, there's a fullness, there's an abundance, there's a rejoicing. When we live out the generosity of God that has been poured into us, when we model that for the other, there's a richness of life that we may not know. You can either choose a life of destruction, or you choose a life that really is life. Have you ever been driving down the interstate and you've seen those billboards that tell you what the Mega Millions and Powerball lottery is? You know, like you see them and you see the numbers, and all of a sudden you're caught up in this kind of alternate reality, right? And you start to think, like, well, you know, let's just say that I won the Mega Millions. What would I do with that? I would pay off my student debt, and I would pay off the student debt of some of my family if they're nice to me, and I would build a house, but it would be a nice house, but it wouldn't be too nice, but it'd be enough for me and several other families, but not that there would be other families, just it would be that. You know, like you start to think about this, the next thing you know, you're in Fairmont, and you didn't realize that you were going to Fairmont. And so you stop in Fairmont and you're like, I'm pretty sure the Lord has told me to buy a Powerball ticket. Like that's how that goes. I'm not the only one that's happened to, right? I drove by that sign the other day, and Beth and I ended up having this conversation. And I said, like, how much money do you think you need to have before having more money doesn't matter? Like, what's the number of money you need to have, right? And so, and I started it like this. How many millions of dollars do you need to have before, like, the next million just doesn't matter? So we talk about this and debate this. I don't think we ever settled on an answer. But then I saw this thing from Malcolm Gladwell just this week. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called David and Goliath. And in that book, Gladwell writes about the amount of money that is kind of the peak of happiness for the American family. Like, if you have this money, more money isn't going to make you happier. The number's $75,000. So it's not millions like I anticipated. Gladwell says if you have that, that's about as happy as you're going to get. So when we hear this text, and we hear the admonition to the rich, and when we hear the call to the rich who are willing to be generous and to give, we can't just think about like Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos, right? This is for us. This is for regular people who are welcome to hear the good news to live generously. And it is good news. This call to live generously is deeply good news. This call to be people that give is deeply good news, because you hear what Paul says. The call to be generous is not because other people need your money. It is so that you can experience the freedom and hope that comes from giving. It's so that you are not caught and controlled by money. Paul says to Timothy to pursue eternal life. He says this in verse 12, take hold of that which lasts. Take hold of that which is eternal. And Paul's putting in front of him this call to say, invest in the stuff that matters. Invest in the stuff that's going to last long term. Invest in the relationships and in the people and in the call that's going to matter when it comes to eternity. We get to live in this moment where eternity is now and not yet, where the reign of God is being announced and it's not seen in its fullness, and we get to partner with God in making that reign more of a reality. And part of the way we do that, part of the way we strive to take hold of that which is eternal, part of the way we strive to take hold of that which is long-lasting, Paul says, is by being deeply generous with what we've been given. It is good news for us that we are invited to be generous people. It is good news for us that our life is not just a hamster wheel that says get more, get more, get more. It is good news for us that we are invited beyond the striving to something that is real and lasting and permanent. That in itself is the hope. I keep thinking about the verse where Paul says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. I think it's the most misquoted verse in the Bible, right? People toss it out there all the time. But what they end up saying is money is the root of all evil. And that's not what Paul says. Paul doesn't say that money in itself is evil. In fact, Paul understands that money is a tool that can be used for good. Do you hear that? Money is a tool that can be used for good. It is the love of money that leads to all kinds of evil. And I was thinking about that this week because there are ways that I can point out the love of money in the world and say that is clearly something that's leading to evil. Right? I can look at the sex trafficking industry where $10 billion a year pass between hands as people are sold. That's evil. Right? I can look at the destruction of the planet and say that is something that's leading towards evil. There are all kinds of places where I can look and say, yeah, that person's love of money is leading towards evil, but the question isn't about that person today, it's about me. Because sometimes I love money way more than I should. So I thought this week, how am I going to know? How do I know when I love money more than I should? Here's how it works out for me. I don't know how it's going to work out for you. I know that I love money way more than I should when I put a sense of social status on who has what. And I work in my own mind to make a pecking list of who's important and who's not, and figure out where I fall into that based on the money that I have. We get a journal from the annual conference every year, and in the back of it is there are statistical tables that tell you all kinds of information about every church. And one of the things it tells you the salary of every pastor in the conference. And I know I'm not in a good place in my love of money when I find myself looking down that list to see where I rank. The love of money has taken root in my heart. I know I'm not in a good place when it comes to the love of money, when I am so committed to the work that I have to do and believe so much in my own importance that I become a workaholic, that I don't take a break for Sabbath, and my self-importance goes through the roof. It's one of the ways that money shows up. And I say that's for me is the love of money, and it leads to something that's not good. One of the ways that I know that money has taken root in my life in a way that I don't want it to is when I become so convinced in my own self-reliance that I have enough, I've earned enough, I've made enough, that I don't need anybody else to chime in. That I can do it on my own and I don't need God. That somehow I think that on my own, I can take care of myself. Paul says we rely on riches that are fleeting. And more than once, I have taken comfort in riches that are fleeting. They're not on the things that are lasting. When that happens, I know that the love of money has taken root in my heart. What does it look like for you? What does it look like for you to know that the love of money has taken root in your heart? See, the thing about money is this. When we love money, we don't control it. It controls us. When we love money, we don't control it, it controls us. And the only way to step away from that is to begin to hold the things we have with open hands, to understand that they are a gift from God, to understand that they're not ours, we're just stewards of them, and to live as generous people. The only way to step away from this love of money that can consume us, that can shape us, that can turn us into the people we don't want to be, is not to hold too tight, but to open our hands and say, God, this came from you, and I'm willing to give it back. And in that, we'll find freedom. I'm not talking about giving away a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage of your money. I'm talking about living as someone with a deep sense of generosity. If you put the picture up for me. One of the things we do at Celebrate Recovery on Wednesday nights is we take an offering. And that feels a little weird to me sometimes because some of the people that are there are not necessarily people that have a lot to share. But we do it because it gives people an opportunity to participate in the work. So a couple weeks ago, we took the offering, the basket got passed, our large group had ended, and I was making my way out of the sanctuary. And one of my friends who doesn't have a home, sleeps on the street, came up to me, and he handed me this crinkled up dollar bill. He said, I missed the offering basket and wanted to make sure that I could give too, and pressed this crinkled dollar bill into my hand. He doesn't have much. We'd had a conversation earlier that day that he wasn't quite sure where he was going to eat. And in that moment, it was so holy and so moving and so powerful to see someone live with deep generosity. I wanted to keep the dollar bill to remind myself what it meant to be a generous person, but I knew that wasn't why it was given. So I took a picture and put it in the plate so it could do the work that God intended it to do. I won't forget it very soon. What would it look like for you to be generous? Deeply, completely generous? What would it look like for you to choose to recklessly do good? What would it look like for you to find the freedom that comes from generosity and the joy that comes from giving, that we might join God in God's work?